Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lunch panel as part of the CAPA National Student Case Competition. My name is Eric Champagne. I am a professor of public administration and the director of the Center on Governance at the University of Ottawa. And today I have the privilege to moderate this fantastic panel this afternoon. I am accompanied actually with 4 wonderful panelists whom I will introduce in a few seconds. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. J'ai le plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cette table ronde organisée dans le cadre de la compétition annuelle d'études de cas organisée par l'ACPAP. Mon nom est Éric Champagne. Je suis un professeur en administration publique à l'Université d'Ottawa et je suis aussi le directeur du Centre d'études en gouvernance de la même université. On m'a confié aujourd'hui la tâche d'organiser, d'animer plutôt ce panel et je suis accompagné aujourd'hui par 4 fantastiques invités que je vais vous présenter dans quelques secondes. Before going further, I would like to recognize that I am speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I want to express my gratitude to the generations of Algonquin people, past and present, as the original caretakers of this space I occupy today. I am very grateful to be here. Je voudrais commencer par reconnaître que je me trouve sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé des Algonquins Anishinaabe. Je viens à exprimer ma gratitude envers les générations passées et présentes du peuple algonquin, qui sont les premiers gardiens de l'espace que j'occupe et je suis très reconnaissant. The subject of today's panel is a journey of new public servants, expectations versus reality. I would like to say that this panel is jointly organized by the Canada School of Public Service, CAPA, Carleton University, and many other partners. And what I'm going to try to do with this panel is to draw from the experience of young professionals who recently entered the public service and get them to talk more specifically about their transition from being a student to being a civil servant. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our 4 panelists. Let's start with Charnel Morgan. Charnel is a senior policy advisor working in operations at the Privy Council Office, leading the advancement of a number of social policies. Charnel is also the co-founder of the Canadian Black Policy Network and Toronto Black Policy Conference, a not-for-profit organization aimed at creating a safe space for Black community members and allies to explore policy issues affecting Canada's Black communities. Charnel est passionnée par la création d'espaces équitables et par l'engagement dans les politiques publiques. Elle est reconnue comme un leader émergente et a été sélectionnée comme boursière d'Action Canada pour 2021-2022. Elle a été aussi reconnue comme l'une des 100 femmes les plus puissantes en 2022 en sa qualité de leader du RBC Future Launch. Maintenant, permettez-moi de présenter Catherine Leblanc. Catherine is a proud Acadian with extensive experience in the federal public service. She began her public service career in 2015 as a student at Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. Elle est actuellement analyste principale des programmes à Pêche et Océan Canada et coprésidente du réseau des jeunes fonctionnaires fédéraux du Nouveau-Brunswick. Elle est une graduée en administration publique de l'Université d'Ottawa et d'une maîtrise de l'Université de Moncton. Et si je peux me permettre d'ajouter sur une note plus personnelle, elle est aussi une de mes anciennes étudiantes à l'Université d'Ottawa et nous sommes très fiers de son parcours professionnel. Next, I would like to introduce Jérôme Bilodeau. Jérôme is the director of the building division at NRCan, Office of Energy Efficiency. He oversees there the delivery of programs and policies aiming to save energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. En outre, Jérôme enseigne la politique d'efficacité énergétique à l'Université Carleton et il siège au conseil d'administration du Conseil international du Canada, la section de la capitale nationale, et au comité directeur de l'Alliance mondiale pour les bâtiments et la construction de l'ONU. Last but not least, we have Anandu Nair with us today. Anandu is an IT advisor at Employment and Social Development Canada. He graduated with his master's in public policy from the Monk School in 2021. He holds an undergrad degree in biotechnology from the University of Toronto. Anandou a travaillé comme analyste commercial pour Rogers Communications et comme analyste junior pour l'École de la fonction publique du Canada sur divers projets axés surtout sur la technologie. Il est spécialisé dans l'analyse commerciale, la gestion de projets, la transformation numérique et la prestation de services. Here's what we're going to do today. I will take about 20 minutes to kick off the conversation with some initial questions, but most importantly, we want to answer your questions. So at any time, you can use the Q&A button that you can see at the bottom of your screen. Write your question. We only take written questions. So write your question in English or in French. And I'm going to pick some of them to feed the discussion. Donc, je vais d'abord prendre une vingtaine de minutes pour lancer la conversation en posant quelques questions initiales. Mais le plus important, je le répète, c'est que nous voulons répondre à vos questions. Donc, à tout moment, vous pouvez utiliser le bouton qui s'appelle Q&A, Q&A, que vous trouverez en bas de votre écran. Écrivez vos questions en français ou en anglais. Je vais les sélectionner pour alimenter la suite de notre discussion. Now, let's start with a very general question. I'll start by asking our panelists, what skills help you most in your transition from academia to the public service? And does the federal government provide any professional development opportunities? And I'd like to start with the same order. So Charnel first. What's your take on this, Charnel?
Yeah, so I think I would probably say that the skills that helped me the most were being able to, so I graduated from the Monk School of Public Affairs and Public Policy some years ago. And so the degree that I kind of took was really focused on writing. And so I, was able to write position papers within grad school and transitioning out of grad school into the federal public service. A lot of those same skills were required. It was really being able to write concisely, being able to research and really to develop a coherent narrative or argument to be able to put forth into a paper that's going to be sent to senior management or a deputy minister. I think I also relied on some of my work experience and volunteer experience, right? So really being able to engage with interpersonal skills, working in teams that I developed throughout grad school, that same skills transitions to the workplace. No matter what you're doing, if you have to reach across a different team or call or a secretariat to kind of grab information, to really be able to lead on that deliverable. So I would probably say just teamwork was one of the skills, strong communication, as well as being able to write effectively and concisely and to demonstrate an argument that, translates from when you're working in grad school for your papers. The same thing goes on when you're in the workplace.
Merci, Charnel. Thank you. J'aimerais me tourner vers Catherine maintenant. Catherine, quelle serait ta réponse à cette question?
Un peu similaire à ce que Charnel expliquait, l'habileté d'écrire, de rédiger des rapports, faire de la recherche, c'est certain que c'est des atouts, des habiletés qui étaient nécessaires au début, surtout moi, dans mon cas, la maîtrise que j'ai faite en administration publique, c'était une maîtrise professionnelle. Donc, voulant dire qu'on n'avait pas de thèse, on n'avait pas de mémoire, il fallait faire un stage. Donc, c'était ça mon expérience. Puis...
J'ai perdu...
C'est revenu, je crois.
M'entendez-vous toujours?
Oui.
Oui, OK. Moi, je vous entends plus. Mais donc, dans le cadre de ma maîtrise, c'est ça, je devais faire un stage et donc cette expérience-là est venue m'aider un peu. Mais je dirais aussi que du côté plutôt de l'apprentissage, du fonctionnement du gouvernement aussi, qu'on apprend au sein de nos cours d'administration publique ou sciences politiques, public policy, peu importe ce que vous étudiez, ça m'a vraiment aidé aussi. C'est venu vraiment m'aider aussi là, au début de ma carrière, surtout comprendre vraiment la machine gouvernementale, puis comment les différents ministères fonctionnent, les agents centraux, donc des choses comme ça. Donc, je dirais que ça aussi, c'est des atouts qu'on pense pas toujours qui viendraient nous servir comme employés de la fonction publique fédérale, mais c'est un gros morceau, je dirais.
OK, merci Catherine. Maintenant, Jérôme, à ton tour.
Oui, je crois on va peut-être se répéter un peu, mais mon expérience, c'est que les compétences générales sont tout aussi importantes que les compétences techniques. Donc, de mon côté, de la même façon, la communication est absolument critique. Donc, être capable d'écrire de façon claire et concise, précise et structurée est absolument critique. Et c'est pas, on pense que c'est facile, on pense que c'est courant et ça ne l'est pas. J'ai passé beaucoup de temps à embaucher des gens et je dois vous dire que les compétences de communication sont beaucoup plus difficiles à trouver que des compétences techniques. Deux autres compétences générales, je dirais, qui sont critiques, c'est tout d'abord d'avoir une vue d'ensemble. Et donc, être capable de pouvoir non seulement comprendre l'objectif et les tâches d'un emploi en particulier, mais de comprendre le contexte plus général, les politiques plus générales et ce qu'on cherche à accomplir. Donc, c'est assez classique, je dirais, au début de carrière, c'était mon cas sûrement, d'être un peu dans les détails, alors qu'on veut être capable de démontrer une compréhension plus générale. Finalement, je dirais aussi les compétences interpersonnelles. Une des caractéristiques particulière du gouvernement, c'est que c'est énorme. C'est la plus grosse organisation au pays. Et donc, la meilleure façon d'être efficace, c'est d'être capable non seulement de travailler avec les autres, mais de savoir à qui parler, comment les convaincre et de faire certaines choses. Et c'est absolument critique. Donc, voilà, compétences générales avant compétences techniques, je dirais.
Excellent, Jérôme, merci. Let's turn now to Anandu. What's your take on this question, Anandu?
The tough part about going last is to keep up with some of these amazing answers and I guess kind of apply resourcefulness. One thing I would say is it's kind of touching on what Charnel and was talking about is the ability to take a lot of information and kind of compact it into digestible content, because a lot of times your managers, your directors, ADMs are very, very busy people and they don't have the time to read as much as you do. So ability to gather a vast array of information and then compact it into something digestible, I feel like is one of the crucial skills that I feel like you really hone in graduate school. You are often reading hundreds and hundreds of pages a week, and you kind of have to be put in a situation where you have to compact that and make it understandable easily through decks or briefs or briefing notes, right? Another thing I would say is problem solving. Often, I feel like what distinguishes high caliber analysts is that they're told what the problem is by senior management or executives. And if you're in an advisor position, it's your job to come up with a strategy to address that problem. And ingenuity, I feel like, is one of the most powerful things that you can apply in your profession, right? Like, how do we fix problems? If you're a natural problem solver, then you will turn heads because you're able to find creative solutions to very multifaceted challenges. And I joke about this with my consultant friends all the time. Like, I ask them, what's the skill that you guys really think that you see in your field a lot? They say, we're advanced Googlers. And that's kind of funny, but it's actually really true, right? If you get like Google, the internet has everything. It has all the information you'll ever need and the access to technologies at a scale that we've never seen before. So if you can really understand how to research, how to compile that information and apply it to your advisor roles, I think you'll like stand aside from the crowd, right? So I think those two things. The last thing I'll also say is be bold. Not everybody might agree with this, but don't be scared. You're coming from academia, you're well-educated people, you can think, you have critical thinking skills, so apply those thinking skills. I remember when I was working for the school, the Canada School, I started my federal public career there. And I'll say this, it's completely different working at the school compared to any of these larger departments because it's so big, right, compared to the school. But one thing I noticed right away about the Canada School of Public Service is that you'll have that relationship with your senior management and executives. I don't think that you'll really get at any other department. And they didn't pay me to say this. I just genuinely feel like that because I started my career there. But be bold in the sense that, ask really, really good questions. I guarantee you other people in that meeting have the same question, but if a DG is talking or a director is talking, sometimes there's this kind of facade that you can't ask questions. No, ask the questions, because if they can't provide answers to your questions, there's clearly a gap, right? And you might be the one that found that gap. And then people will be like, okay, maybe what does this person have to say about this? Because they ask really, really good questions. And I think that's also becoming a part of BOLD, to have that confidence to ask those tough questions and never feel bad about the questions you have, because I guarantee other people will have the same questions as well. So. back to you.
Hey, lovely, Anandu. And something I take from your answer is the importance of soft skills in how you apply your competencies on top of your special technical skills. So that's very interesting. A real great kickoff, and I'm seeing a few questions in the Q&A. Keep sending your questions. Continuez d'envoyer vos questions. Nous allons y répondre dans quelques instants. Mais pour l'instant, je vais aller vers une autre question, si vous le permettez. Et donc, je vais, I will ask the second question that we've planned for and I'm sure that's going to be of great interest for our participants. So do you have any advice on the application process and how one can stand out from the other applicants when you apply in the for a job in the civil service? And I'll do the reverse order this time, and Anandu, so you'll be the first to answer that question. Go ahead.
I think one of the things I've had to grapple with myself is that even though I might seem very extroverted, I am an introvert to the core. I rather stay home, like with my family, rather than just go out and do stuff. That's just me personally. One thing I've had to learn throughout my professional career is that you have to be extroverted to get those opportunities. People need to know who you are and what you're able to bring to the table when you apply for these positions. And these positions are very, very competitive. So getting that extra edge in terms of networking and talking to people, putting yourself out there, going to events and actually showing people who you are, that's a big component of job hunting. That's one of the lessons I've had to teach myself, because I've had to tell myself teach myself the skills to actually go out, talk, communicate confidently. And I think that kind of translates to all other aspects of your life, including finding a career and then also shining in that career, right? So getting that skills to, even if you're an introverted person, to make sure people know who you are and what you're able to bring to the table, right? You literally have to market yourself to potential employers. So that's one thing I would say. Other thing in terms of government process, they're very detail oriented, right? They're looking for very specific, concrete examples, and you can't be lazy in these application processes. I'm sorry, it's a lot of effort. It takes time. Start early as possible, and chip away at it little bit by little bit over the weeks, right? Because they're often asking for very, very specific examples where you have to list the situation, what the task was, what the action was, and what the eventual actions led to the result. And those kind of questions often take a lot of time to think about, and you have to think through them thoroughly before you answer. It's a very heavy loaded process, but I feel like if you actually put in the effort in terms of preparing early in advance, that you'll be able to reap the rewards. So yeah.
Thank you, Anandu. Maintenant, j'aimerais demander à Jérôme s'il a des conseils sur la procédure d'embauche ou la manière de se démarquer des autres candidats. Jérôme?
Je vais répondre de deux façons. Tout d'abord, le processus, puis ensuite, une fois que tu as passé le processus. Et c'est important de, tout d'abord, comprendre comment le processus fonctionne. Et j'ai vu très bien des gens qui étaient très qualifiés, qui n'ont pas réussi à passer parce qu'ils pensent que c'est une entrevue ou un processus semblable au secteur privé. Le processus fédéral est complètement différent et est très rigide, très strict, très standardisé. Donc, la première chose, c'est d'accepter cette réalité et de la comprendre et de vous trouver un coach. Trouvez quelqu'un qui a déjà fait ce genre de processus et demandez-leur comment ça fonctionne et comment est-ce que c'est différent. Ils vont vous expliquer que vous devez utiliser les mêmes mots qui sont dans la description du poste. Ils vont vous expliquer que vous devez donner des exemples comme Anandu vient d'expliquer. Ils vont vous expliquer tout ça. Et donc, c'est vraiment critique de jouer le jeu du système avant de même penser à la prochaine étape, je dirais. Donc, soyez réaliste sur le processus. Oui, ça prend du temps. Oui, c'est difficile et c'est long. Et c'est très différent, mais c'est vraiment important de jouer ce jeu et de vraiment faire face à la réalité. Première chose. Une fois que vous avez passé, vous êtes dans le système maintenant, c'est plus un peu comme dans le secteur privé, vous pouvez parler à des gestionnaires. Et donc là, pour vous démarquer, je dirais qu'il y a 2-3 choses. Anandu a déjà mentionné quelque chose. Un, c'est qu'il faut être proactif. Donc, les gens ne vont pas vous peut-être que les gestionnaires vont vous contacter directement, mais c'est beaucoup mieux et préférable si c'est vous qui faites le premier pas. Donc, le conseil que je donne à bien des gens, c'est d'étudier GADS. Je ne sais pas c'est quoi en français, GADS, mais c'est le répertoire des employés fédéraux. Apprenez à comprendre qui fait quoi, et écrivez-leur. Écrivez-leur directement, demandez « J'aimerais vous rencontrer, je me suis qualifié, avez-vous du temps la semaine prochaine? » Soyez très précis. Et donc, après, une fois que vous pouvez rencontrer la personne, là, vous pouvez démontrer votre valeur, vous pouvez démontrer vos compétences et votre intérêt pour le poste. Et c'est là que les autres choses, donc vos expériences, votre connaissance du sujet, votre connaissance du contexte et vos compétences de communication dont on a parlé tout à l'heure, c'est là que ça peut briller. Mais vous comprenez, il y a tout un processus avant d'arriver là, donc il faut vraiment porter attention à ces étapes-là.
Hey, merci beaucoup, Jérôme, pour ces judicieux conseils. Et maintenant, Catherine, qu'auriez-vous à ajouter sur ce sujet? Merci.
Vous m'entendez, là?
On t'entend très bien.
Parfait,
et
merci.
Tu sembles nous entendre aussi. Merci.
Oui, je vous entends. Jérôme et Anandou ont pas mal couvert ce que j'aurais proposé, ce que j'aurais donné comme, comme astuce, là, comme truc. Mais un des meilleurs conseils que je me suis fait donner, puis ça répète un peu ce qu'Anandou a dit, mais c'était de répondre aux questions. Si la question te demande quelle couleur est le ciel, décris le ciel. Il est bleu, il y a des nuages blancs, il y a un soleil jaune, tu sais, mets-en. Puis quand tu penses qu'il n'y en a pas assez ou tu penses qu'il y a trop d'informations, quand tu penses qu'il y a trop d'informations, il n'y en a probablement pas assez. Donc, il faut vraiment mettre beaucoup d'informations. Puis c'est comme ça que tu réussis à te démarquer vraiment parce que là, ton application est complète. Puis les gens qui évaluent ton application sont capables de dire, OK, oui, cette personne-là est qualifiée ou on croit qu'elle serait qualifiée pour le poste. Donc, c'est vraiment de répondre aux questions. Puis ça, c'est tant dans l'application quand vous soumettez quelque chose en ligne que dans votre processus d'entrevue, par exemple, ou même les examens, des choses comme ça. Donc, l'entrevue, d'être préparé. Souvent, au gouvernement, on nous donne un peu de temps avant l'entrevue avec des questions pour se préparer, se donner un peu de trouver des exemples. Donc, on ne pas des questions comme ça sur le tas. Donc, c'est de prendre le 20-30 minutes qu'on vous offre pour vraiment bien préparer vos réponses, puis d'avoir un peu... Puis Anandou l'a mentionné dans sa réponse aussi, là, mais d'utiliser une structure, situation, tâche, action, résultat. Donc, vraiment de suivre une structure puis de répondre à ces questions-là puis comme il faut. Donc, si vous suivez ça, habituellement, la personne qui évalue votre présentation ou l'entrevue, c'est sûr que vous vous démarquez. D'avoir déjà été de l'autre côté de la table, c'est certain que les candidates là, qui répondent des questions comme ça, c'est beaucoup plus simple à évaluer puis à déterminer s'ils ont les capacités ou les habiletés pour le poste qui cherchent à pourvoir. Puis, un peu pour renchérir ce que Jérôme disait sur une fois que vous êtes au sein de la fonction publique, il y a beaucoup plus, tu sais, on dit souvent que c'est grand, c'est immense, il y a des opportunités infinies au gouvernement fédéral. Donc, une fois que vous êtes là, c'est ça, c'est de réseauter, de rencontrer des gens, que vous participez à des panels comme ça, des fois, et vous entendez quelqu'un parler, puis vous dites, ah, ben ça serait intéressant de voir qu'est-ce que cette personne-là fait, ou ça serait intéressant de travailler avec cette personne-là parce que ça vient chercher mes connaissances, ça vient chercher mes intérêts. Ben, c'est ça, c'est de ne pas se gêner, mais d'être précis, puis de poser vos questions avec le plus de détails possible aussi là, quand vous communiquez avec ces personnes-là. Souvent, les gens qui participent à des panels, là, je ne vais pas parler pour mes co-panélistes ici, là, mais je sais que dans mon cas, si quelqu'un veut me rejoindre, j'ai aucun problème à recevoir des questions. Là, fait que c'est ça. Fait que souvent, les gens qui se mettent l'avant comme ça, c'est des gens qui sont ouverts à discuter avec vous là, pour répondre à des questions. Donc, c'est ça les suggestions que j'aurais pour les gens qui veulent entrer au gouvernement fédéral.
Formidable, Catherine. Merci beaucoup. Je n'ai pas de doute que tu vas recevoir beaucoup de demandes de la part de nos participants et c'est un avantage d'être ici aujourd'hui pendant notre discussion. Alors, let me turn to Charnel. What would you say, Charnel, about how to apply and how to stand out from other candidates? What's your take?
Yeah, I feel like my colleagues mentioned all the really good stuff and all the key important ones. So now I feel like I'm left scrambling. I was trying to take notes and trying to see what else I could say. But I really do agree with Jérôme and Catherine that, like, you know, these competitions are merit-based and they are very standardized. And so really having detailed responses, and as Catherine mentioned, right, like using the STAR, the method, situation, task, action, result, and answering your questions would really help you. The first time that I started to do these job applications, you kind of feel silly as you're writing it. If you feel silly, that means you're on the right track. Like you're really breaking down every step and you're like, well, this seems basic. Like, why do I have to explain how did I research? But you want to show like, what did you do to research? So like you looked at, you know, secondary literature reviews, or you looked at like, I don't know, like reports. If you really have to be super specific, because they're merit-based, they really need to be able to say yes, check mark, or those who are evaluating it, that like, yes, they clearly demonstrated how they conducted research, how they analyzed. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Like if you feel silly writing it, maybe it might be you're on the good track. Again, like Catherine and Jérôme both mentioned, like network and connect with individuals. So if there's a job that you're really interested in, or position or a level, and you know someone who is at that stage, really go and just have a coffee chat with them. I have coffee chats to this day, and I don't think I'll ever stop having coffee chats. I think they're so informative, and just kind of pick their brain. One thing someone told me, and I think this is so true. People love talking about themselves. So when you really reach out to kind of like ask for advice, they're really honored to kind of share their experience. It's rare that I've ever had someone say no. So really rely on that and just reach out. Two things that I'd probably say that I don't think were mentioned, rely on all your experience. Like don't discount anything when you're applying to like, again, speaking in like the federal public service sense, count it all. Like count your volunteer experience, count your education experience, count your work outside the public service or whatever it is. Like don't discount it. And oftentimes I remember when I first started, I was hesitant to put on things I did maybe that weren't necessarily considered maybe like no professional or wasn't paid work, but those experiences are really helped me to be able to get screened into those job processes. So count all your experiences. And then the next tip I would say is you'll start to realize that a lot of the questions are quite similar within the public service when you do job applications. So I literally have a folder on my computer where it says, where it's titled GC jobs, so Government of Canada jobs. And I when I'm done answering the questions in the application, I save them on a Word doc and I just put them in a folder. Because oftentimes I could reuse or use that as a good template and build on it, right? So your experiences will always stay the same, or like your skill set, but they'll likely be enhanced and improve over time as you're climbing the ladder up. And so your responses will be more detailed, but you still want to be able to kind of keep a bank. And I say that because it will save you half the time when you're applying to jobs the next time around, because you have a good template, and then all you have to do is just really build on it and expand to ensure that you're meeting the criteria as set out in the application.
Lovely. Shauna, thank you so much. Well, I'm gonna myself, you can expect that I'm gonna schedule a little coffee chat with you. I learned so much from what you're saying and from all the panel. And I take a few things as a lesson learned. First of all, everything counts, right? At your age, everything is important. Something you don't think it can be important. And I really appreciated your advice to be proactive, you know, be a little bit more proactive to try to distinguish yourself from other people. Continuez à envoyer des questions. On en a quelques-unes dans l'espace pour les questions-réponses. Je vais en prendre quelques-unes maintenant. I'll take a few questions from the crowd, from the participants, and I'll start with the question from Kirion Junus. Kirion is asking, when you are in the process to be bridged from a student position to a casual IT2, how do you bring up and negotiate your pay increment? Can I possibly get IT2 above level 1? And yes, how and what can I bring it up? I am a grad student with a few years past working experience, So I'm hoping to get higher level in the pay increment. For me, that makes sense to start with Anandu. I think you have a little bit more experience in the IT world. So I'll start with you. And if any of our panelists wants to pitch in a few ideas, I'll take your, I'll give you a tour to you. Anandu.
Yeah. So I think it's very situation specific. For example, if you're bridging from your current team to an IT2 at a casual, then your manager clearly has been working with you for that semester or 2 semesters or whatever it might be. So a more of a candid conversation can be had about, where you should be getting paid at what step, depending on the skill set and the caliber that you've been able to display in that time that you've been working with that team, right? But I also feel like outside of that, when you're having this conversation about being bridged into a position, I think managers, as far as I've seen, they have to really make the case about how your experiences are tied to that level that you're trying to get bridged to. So, as your manager could really, really like you, and you might be a great analyst or an advisor, but at the same time, they have to make a case about why that pay increment is required based on your experiences. But I feel like having a genuine, candid conversation where you can sit down, be honest, and show these are the X, Y, and Z that I've done compared to the market. This is what I think I should be getting paid based on my experience. That conversation should be candid, because if you don't have that conversation, and this applies to any jobs anywhere, if you don't feel like you're being compensated at the level that you think you should be compensated, that's not a good way to enter a new job, because then you're going to feel like, I'm getting slammed with a lot of work now, and I'm not happy with where I am because I don't feel like I'm getting paid what I need to be getting paid. And that's not a good way to start a job, or any kind of job in my perspective. You deserve to, actually give that opportunity to try and get what you think you should be getting paid, and having an honest conversation, regardless of the level, or classification. I don't think it's just IT limited. And I think, any of the panelists would agree this applies to all the categories, all categorizations and classifications. Having that genuine conversation, and rather just being anecdotal. I don't think anecdotal really helps in that situation. I think I should be getting paid this because, I feel I'm a good person. No, that is not how it works. You actually have an argument when you come to the table saying, what have you done and why do you feel like that should be something you should, be recognized for. Hopefully that helps. Eric,
thanks, Anandu. Thank you very much. Anyone else want to weigh in on that specific question? Quelqu'un d'autre veut intervenir? Je vois Jérôme, la main levée. Jérôme?
Yeah, I'll build on this a little bit, maybe in English, because the question was in English. The short answer is just ask. What I would add, though, is that you may not get it. So just be ready for that. And if you don't get it, still take the job, perhaps, if it makes sense for you. And that's the key thing, start applying for higher level jobs, right? Start applying for an IT3, because we just talked about how it takes a year to go through the whole process and might be longer than that. So that's a general advice, is you should always be applying for the next level, so that when the time comes, you're ready, or you have a bit of leverage. So short answer, just ask, but be prepared to get perhaps a yes, perhaps a no.
Merci, Jérôme. Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un d'autre qui veut intervenir? Sinon, on peut passer à une autre question. On a couvert le sujet. Merci beaucoup. The second question is anonymous. How important has networking been early in your public service career? How can students and those outside of the federal government network in a virtual environment? And I'd like to start with Catherine, maybe, parce que tu as déjà ouvert la porte, je pense, au réseautage, disons-le comme ça. Alors, à toi la parole.
Merci. Oui, le réseautage a été et continue d'être une partie très importante de ma carrière. En fait, je crois que depuis que j'ai commencé en 2015-2016, tous mes emplois, sauf un, étaient à travers le réseautage. Donc, j'ai eu à peu près 4 différents postes dans les dernières années. Puis, il y en a seulement un que j'ai passé à travers un processus formel, entrevue, examen, name it, j'ai passé à travers. Les autres, c'était soit j'ai rencontré des gens à des différentes sessions, j'ai partagé mon CV. Donc, le réseautage était une partie très, très, très importante de ma carrière. Donc, c'est ça. Donc, je l'encourage à n'importe qui veut, qui veut l'entendre. Puis, pour les étudiants qui sont soit internes ou externes au gouvernement fédéral, il y a plusieurs opportunités. Il y a des groupes qui organisent des choses, des opportunités de réseautage virtuel. Au courant de l'année, là, je vais partager quelques ressources avec les organisateurs du panel. Donc, si c'est possible de partager avec les participants. Puis sinon, ça revient un peu à ce qu'on disait quand on répondait à la question sur l'application, puis au sein du gouvernement. C'est de trouver des moments ou trouver des gens qui font le même genre de travail qui vous intéresse, puis de communiquer avec ces gens-là. Donc, utiliser les plateformes de médias sociaux. Il y a beaucoup de fonctionnaires, beaucoup de gestionnaires qui sont actifs sur des plateformes comme LinkedIn. Et donc, c'est facile de communiquer avec ces gens-là. Donc, d'envoyer un message, dire « Hey, j'ai cette expérience ici, est-ce qu'on pourrait discuter? » Donc, il y a ces plateformes-là, il y a des plateformes que sur Twitter, peu importe, là, il y a des groupes aussi là, sur des plateformes de médias sociaux comme Facebook où est-ce que les posts sont affichés et puis des gens qui cherchent des employés. C'est tout là. C'est vraiment, tu n'as pas besoin de faire grand-chose autre que lever ta main puis essayer de communiquer avec ces gens-là. Donc, je dirais, c'est ça. Donc, d'essayer d'être actif puis de trouver des gens sur les plateformes de médias sociaux. Puis, des fois, c'est comme j'ai mentionné, il y a des organismes à l'intérieur du gouvernement qui organisent des événements comme ça. Puis souvent, on lance l'invitation justement des universités, des collèges locaux pour des étudiants viennent nous joindre. Puis, on n'a pas beaucoup de gens qui viennent des fois. Donc, ça serait peut-être l'opportunité de venir puis de vous présenter. Donc, ouais, c'est ce que je dirais là, pour le réseautage.
Merci, Catherine. I'd like to ask Charnel, do you have any advice regarding networking and career development? Do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I will say that I think Catherine covered a really great portion of like some of those key points about networking and career development. I think one thing that I'll add is like for those who are maybe already in the public service, there's a lot of communities for young professionals, right? So like they use it's a YPN. They use Public Service Network. I think it's what it's called, and it's really to encourage. You know, new. It's really about. It's not necessarily young. The organization or communities or network is really about bringing together new public servants, right? So you can have a new public servant, you know, in their 30s or 40s, but it's nice because you have that community to really bounce things off and ideas off of. But I agree, right? It's really kind of being able to reach out and to have those coffee chats. I think it's about if your respective school at the moment, your grad school or program has opportunities where they're hosting events and they often kind of bring speakers from the public service to speak on a particular topic, go to those events. I think when you're in the workplace as well, I despite me seeing maybe like an extrovert, I actually like to kind of just like be to myself. And I found that I had to force myself to really go to like the work socials. You know, they're really important because that's where you get to meet your colleagues and get to know a little bit about them outside the workplace, right? When you're in the work setting, it's sometimes go, and you can't always have the moment to really connect and, you know, see if they went skating on the weekend. But the work socials allow you to kind of get out of that office environment to connect with, you know, your colleagues on a different type of level. So I would encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities when they do come up.
Hey, thank you, Charnel. And if you don't mind, everyone, we're gonna go through other questions because it's we have a lot of questions actually. So we'll try to accelerate a little bit just to cover as many. And I apologize in advance. I see the pace of questions coming in the Q&A box, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to cover them all. But I have a question, let's say for Jérôme here, because I know you work in an organization that do research. So the question is it mandatory to know French for research intensive job in the government, I guess, should be the question. To you?
Right. The short answer is it depends, but mostly no. The federal public service is a big place. So if in parts of the country, maybe French is the requirement, but if you're in the National Capital Region, usually for entry-level and even mid-level positions, English is the ones that you'll see more commonly. Where French becomes required is when you reach a management level and higher. So in my organization, as soon as you have supervisory duties, you need to have some level of bilingualism, at least according to the test. And of course, as you become an executive and higher, you need to be bilingual. But it's certainly not an impediment, I would say. And I would encourage people who don't yet speak the second official language to apply. And then you have opportunities to learn either on the job or through professional development opportunities or on your own. And simply, it's only when you're trying to go a bit higher, then you'll need both usually. So I don't see that as a deterrent. I know a lot of people hear us speak French and they're like, oh no, I'm really nervous. I'm not sure if I can do this or not. You absolutely can. And I encourage you to join.
Thank you, Jérôme. I think it does answer the question quite properly. I have a question from Arlo Sif here, but I think it covers some of the answer that Catherine has answered a little bit earlier. Maybe someone else wants to weigh in. The question is about how can people use social media, help find a job? Any of you found a position through Facebook, LinkedIn, or I don't know, Twitter or another one? Anyone else wants to weigh in on this? Anandu, have you ever found a job on LinkedIn, for instance? What's your take on social media?
Yeah, I think social media is really, really powerful in terms of networking and hiring. I personally have only been in my position for a year and a half, so I'm not really looking for other jobs, but there's tons of groups, IMIT groups, GC policy, formal, informal groups, administration groups. There's tons and tons of groups on Facebook. And I know plenty of friends who have moved on to, higher up positions, because they qualified in a pool first, and hiring managers will go into those groups and say, hey, I'm looking for an EC4, an EC5, English essential, bilingual, whatever it might be, and they will just reach out to those hiring managers through Facebook and get opportunities that way. So I definitely recommend people to join those groups, keep an eye out for those groups, because I think that's completely changed how hiring has happened. Even in my groups, whenever we're thinking about recruiting new staff, one of the options that people always say, oh, why don't we just make a Facebook post? And when we do, we have more than 100 people reach out. And it's in my personal experience, when I've made one of those postings, it is a lot faster to get qualified applicants at hand than through some of the other mediums that are more traditional.
Hey, thanks, Anandu. And I must say, I'm on LinkedIn myself, and I always repost interesting job opportunities in my field. I think it's the right social media to do this. At least that's my understanding of that amongst all of them. Now, let's move to another question that is relating to one of the things that I think Charnel have said during her earlier presentation. You mentioned about write down all of your experiences. Were you referring to the questions they ask in the GC job application? Is it true that we can only have 2 pages max resume? Hence, we cannot pull all of our experience in a resume. So can you solve that real practical problem, Charnel?
Yeah, for sure. So as mentioned from before, the government has a very unique and special process. And so it's actually it's like a multi-step. So I think I'll answer the first and hopefully be able to answer the second. I don't even know if we actually can do this, but I essentially take the questions that they ask and I copy and paste those questions into a Word document. And that's how I'm able to kind of answer or work on the application. So there is a system on the government website that you can work off of, but they time out. If you don't save right away, you can lose your responses. So I think a common practice amongst those who are applying to government jobs is that they'll kind of work on a separate document where they'll copy and paste the questions, and then they're able to kind of take their time and really just, without the timing on and off from the actual application. Now, in terms of your resume being 2 pages, when it comes to the federal public service, you'll be asked to upload your resume to the job portal website. And it's kind of tricky. I don't know if they've changed it now, but generally it's a copy and paste. So that's how it works. It's not the most pretty format that you're used to on your Word document. It really does distort a lot of things. So in that case, I don't think there is a limit because there's not necessarily pages. Now, in general, about whether a resume should be 2 pages or not, I think there's going to be varying views. My fellow panelists might have varying views. I say try to keep your resume really tight with important information. So that's not to say that your resume can't run longer than 2 pages, but if it does run longer than 2 pages, you just got to really justify to make sure that every experience listed on there is really going to be a value add and really sell yourself to that employer. If it's something that isn't necessarily useful or you think won't necessarily be value add or catch your potential employer's eye, maybe you remove it off. I think that's a judgment call that you would have to make. But speaking for myself, my resume, the longest it has ever ran has been 3 pages. And it depends on the job I'm applying to. And if I need to add that detail and rigor because it's competitive, I know what they're looking for, then I'll make that judgment call. But my resume tends to fluctuate depending on the job I'm applying for. So it's a tough question, but I would say generally, give or take, I think 2 pages should be the appropriate length. Does anyone want to disagree with me? Any colleagues want to disagree with me?
I don't see any disagreement here, Charnel. So we're okay. Maybe we can move to the next question. Pour respecter un peu l'équilibre linguistique, je vais poser une question en français. La question nous vient de NRCan. Il nous dit « Bonjour, merci pour le partage de votre expérience. Faut-il nécessairement être qualifié dans un bassin pour commencer une carrière au sein du gouvernement fédéral? Et à part postuler aux offres sur le site Emploi GC du gouvernement du Canada, y a-t-il d'autres façons de se qualifier dans des bassins? » Et j'aimerais poser d'abord la question à Catherine, puis s'il y a d'autres qui veulent intervenir après. Il semble que j'ai l'impression que tu t'y connais assez bien dans le processus. Alors, Catherine, à toi la parole.
Oui, non, vous n'avez pas besoin d'être inscrit à un bassin ou qualifié dans un bassin pour entrer. C'est sûr que c'est une des façons d'appliquer sur des bassins. Puis ces bassins-là sont souvent sont ouverts à plusieurs gestionnaires. Donc, ça vous avez plusieurs chances, là, même s'il y a juste un poste à pourvoir pour un bassin-là, il est quand même disponible à d'autres personnes qui cherchent des employés. Donc, c'est jamais mauvais d'être présent ou d'être qualifié dans un bassin. C'est aussi, un bassin peut aussi servir un peu à une carte pour vous promener d'un endroit à l'autre, dire à certains gestionnaires, hey, je suis qualifié dans ce bassin ici. C'est pas dans ton organisation, mais c'est au même niveau de qu'est-ce que tu recherches. Donc, j'ai démontré que je réponds aux habiletés. Donc, être dans un bassin n'est pas mauvais, mais ça peut être difficile, ça peut être compliqué, surtout quand on essaie d'entrer au gouvernement. Si je parle de mon expérience personnelle, moi, j'ai entré au gouvernement comme étudiante coop. Et puis, quand j'ai terminé ma maîtrise, on a utilisé le mot tantôt, le bridger. Donc, je ne sais pas, il n'y a pas vraiment de mot équivalent en français là, pour le bridging. Là, on utilise l'expression anglaise, là. Mais c'est vraiment le faire le transfert d'un poste d'un rôle d'étudiant à un rôle plus temps plein. Et donc, j'ai entré comme ça. C'était ça ma porte d'entrée à temps plein au sein du gouvernement fédéral. Il y a des gens qui entrent un peu comme je l'ai mentionné tantôt, je me sens comme si je me répète, là, mais juste en faisant un reach-out à communiquer avec des gestionnaires qu'ils ont rencontrés dans peu importe la situation, ça peut être, ça peut être dans n'importe quelle une session de réseautage, ça peut être, tu as rencontré quelqu'un à l'épicerie, puis va mentionner qu'il cherchait quelqu'un ou quelqu'un que tu as été à l'université avec. Donc, il y a des façons de faire entrer des gens à la fonction publique fédérale sans qu'ils soient officiellement qualifiés dans les bassins. Donc, ça prend... Des fois, puis ça dépend des ministères. Là. Je ne sais pas, moi où est-ce que les ministères où est-ce que j'ai travaillé, l'équipe des ressources humaines était toujours assez créative. Donc, ils me permettait d'aller chercher des gens de différentes façons, mais d'autres ministères où c'est un petit peu plus rigide. Donc, ça dépend vraiment de qui... à quelle porte que vous allez cogner, mais je dirais que non, il y a plusieurs autres façons là, d'entrer au sein de la fonction publique. Là. Je ne sais pas si Jérôme, je sais que Jérôme est directeur, fait que je ne sais pas si Jérôme a plus à ajouter là-dessus.
Jérôme, voulais-tu ajouter là-dessus?
Oui, je te mets un petit peu sur le spot, Jérôme.
Non, pas vraiment. Je crois que tu as bien couvert le sujet. Il y a plusieurs façons d'entrer, soit suivant des compétitions, soit avoir un contrat ou un casual, un truc temporaire de façon limitée. Ça se fait avec le réseautage. Et on a parlé de différents trucs, que ce soit Facebook, que ce soit GEDS, que ce soit du réseautage plus organique. Et après, il y a évidemment le bridging, donc les étudiants qui peuvent passer d'étudiants à employés. Donc, c'est les trois méthodes et ce que je suggère, catégorie de méthodes. Et donc, ce que je suggère, c'est de toutes les faire à la fois, autant que possible.
Merci, Jérôme. Je crois que ça complète bien cette question. Alors, the next question is from Nicolas Marina. My question, I feel as though I'm underqualified having studied political sciences and now doing public policy and public administration. Would you recommend a background such as a certificate or additional courses that might make me a more desirable and well-rounded candidate? It seems that the knowledge in school still has me lacking in some ways. So what would you recommend someone to do well-rounded and well-versed themselves to now become a part of the workplace? Anandu, would you like to kick off this response? You got a background that is not necessarily the more traditional. Let's kick off the conversation with you for public management job, and this relates to political sciences and public administration. But what's your take first?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm actually doing my PMP right now. One of the things I think is really important is to keep elevating yourself throughout your career. Just because you do a master's or a PhD doesn't mean there's not other stuff that you can learn, right? So upskilling yourself, because the job market where we're heading, it's becoming very, very competitive. So you need to be upskilling yourself constantly in your job as well as through other avenues as well. So I guess back to the question, it really depends on what kind of jobs you're applying for. For a lot of these program management or delivery jobs, certifications are really, really valuable. That's what it's been my past experience as well. But for example, if you're trying to do something in product management, a CSPO certification might be really valuable. And I'm strictly speaking from a digital and technology perspective. There's a lot of qualifications, especially when we apply for these IT pools that they look for. They'll specifically say, PMP is an asset or a CSPO is an asset. And what they're basically saying is that we really, really like, it's not required for the job, but if you have those certifications, it makes you be a valuable candidate, right? So I think that's the perspective that I try to take, is always keep upskilling yourself and never be satisfied, because everything is elevating and changing and evolving, and you want to be there evolving with the times, right? You don't want to kind of just say, I'm okay with where I am, and maybe that's fine, but at the same time, if you want to keep moving up, you definitely have to upskill yourself. And I think you need to be strategic on where you want to take your career. For example, if you're not working digital service delivery and you don't really care about product management, a CSPO certification is not going to do you any good in policy. It might, but probably not, right? You have to be clever on how you actually utilize. Versus a PMP is more of a general certification, and a lot of policy people that I know are PMP certified. So it really, really depends on where you want to take your career.
All right, Anandu, thank you very much. And I see Charnel wants to jump in. Please go ahead.
I might just say, so I agree with Anandu's response, And I'll just say that based on the questions you've asked, and you have an undergrad in political science and you have a graduate degree in public policy, it seems to me that I don't think you're underqualified, and these are all assumptions, because I'm only going off what you mentioned in your question, but it seems as though you're interested in the policy field. So I think having both an undergrad and a graduate degree has probably given you a really good foundation of what it takes to kind of work in the public policy sphere or public administration. Perhaps maybe what you would like to do is try to get some experience in, maybe that domain. I know maybe, for instance, in the public service, they might ask in the job applications for all this experience that you feel that you might not have, and you're hoping that your academic experience would have given that to you. It did. It gave you the knowledge, and it gave you the ability to write, how to really critically think, analyze. And so there's if you need a little bit more experience, see if like your schools have opportunities to kind of contribute to like those like newspaper columns where you really get to kind of put out articles on particular topics and do that policy analysis. See if there's ways where you can kind of volunteer and start working on research or analysis or putting together briefs or think like pieces, right? Just to kind of essentially allow you to kind of really use those skills that you learned in school. But it seems like you have the academic experience. So maybe what's missing is like that work component. And oftentimes, if you don't have work experience yet, volunteer is a really good start, or an internship. And then from there, it just starts building, right? Because now you have the experience to really be able to land yourself something else. But I'm happy to chat with you also offline if need be.
Charnel, I totally concur with you, and we need to say to Nicholas, he has a really good foundation, right? Just the experience maybe that is missing, but don't trust yourself, Nicholas. I'm sure you will get there at some point. Listen, the time flies, and I'm gonna take only one last question, and it's from Rolsif. Are you aware of any, and I'm asking this question because we're in the middle of a competition today, so I'm gonna take that opportunity. Are you aware of any competition or challenges organized by the government that can help university students have their first job experience as public servants? It's a good question, but you know, I just think it fits with the context of today's competition. Any takes on this? Anyone? Charnel, go ahead.
I might jump in. So there are a few job processes that are geared generally towards undergrad or newly graduate students. That was the question, right? If there's any kind of like specific. So wait, was that the question? Because I don't want to answer it that
well, the question was around competitions or challenges that are organized by the government to get a job. I feel that there are some specific recruitment processes that you know very focused on some sectors or some. So maybe that's how I will interpret this question.
Okay, that's how I interpret it as well. So there's a few. So there's the RPL, which is the I don't know. Research, it's RPL, the Recruitment Policy Leaders Program. So that's one that would encourage you to kind of like look into. There's also a few developmental programs. So there's the APAP program, so the Advanced Policy Analyst Program, where essentially kind of they bring students in, or recent grads at an EC3, I believe. And then within 2 years, they kind of work with them and move them up kind of like the ladder into an EC5. You get experience at central agencies, all three, and then you're kind of sponsored by like a line department. I know Natural Resource Canada also has their own. I think it's called PARDIP. It's also a developmental program. So those are the three off the top of my head that really that are geared towards recent graduates, both undergrad and graduate.
Yes, Charnel, and I would say keep an eye on these type of competitions and apply for it. You know what? It's really time to close this this conversation. It was way too short, but that's all the time we have today. And I would like to thank our wonderful panelists. I'm sure you will agree with me that it was a fantastic discussion. I hope that it was useful for all the attendees as well. I would like to thank you, the participants, and thank you for your questions. There's so many other questions that are asked, and I invite you to keep the conversation going and ask us questions, ask the panel question through social media, LinkedIn, or